All right, guys. This week we're going to be focusing on week 11 course content, which is middle adulthood. Now, you recall from last week we talked about early adulthood and the search for intimacy versus isolation. This week, what we're going to do is we're going to cover things like how middle adulthood changes in family life, work life, things like that. We're going to talk about work and career, touching on Super's theory of life, career, identity model, and we're going to focus also on family transitions, things that change across the adulthood years. So, in terms of Havinghurst's theory, basically a lot of his stuff is adjustment, adjusting to the physical changes that are occurring. All of a sudden, we're not on our peak physical game anymore. Our muscle reserves decrease, our fat reserves increase, things like that. We deal with aging parents. And the role changes that occur in when our parents become so old that they cannot really care for themselves. Changes in our relationship and how we relate to our spouses, our kids, helping our kids grow into adults, and kind of trying to figure out who we are and where we are in terms of like retirement, how we see ourselves in terms of work, and how we kind of develop a balance between work and play. So, breaking it down, the tasks of this age group include kind of having maintaining a holding pattern on your career. If the career that you've developed in early adulthood, you've kind of come into your own in that career, and you're kind of developing your own way of doing your career. Okay, you're becoming an expert in your career. Nurturing your relationships with your kids, your parents, and your spouse, and kind of connected to that is expanding these caring relationships. Helping them grow, helping them have greater meaning and greater depth than what they had when you were an early adult. And then managing your household, kind of in the same vein of managing a career. You're kind of figuring out how you run your household, your standards, your desires for what it means to be the head of the household, or the mother or the father, or whatnot like that. Okay. So in terms of Erikson's stages, we're talking in terms of generativity versus stagnation. So it's asking the question: can I make a difference? What can I do with what I've learned up to this point? If you recall last time, in early adulthood, we've figured out, okay, we're no longer really just accumulating knowledge, we're now applying knowledge. And so how can that application of knowledge make a difference in the world? So Erikson has this to say about generativity versus stagnation. The fashionable insistence of dramatizing the dependence of children on adults often blinds us to the dependence of the older generation on the younger one. Mature man needs to be needed. So what he's saying here is he's kind of highlighting the need for connection, obviously, but also he's highlighting the fact that the older generation may become dependent upon sort of the middle adult generation. Okay, and this causes what's known as the sandwich generation, where the middle adults are caring for their own kids, and all of a sudden now they're having to care for their older parents. And so that causes them to kind of be sandwiched in between these two generations that are both vying for their attention, their resources, and just being dependent upon them. Additionally, in Erikson's book that I've been reading from this entire class, Identity, Youth, and Crisis, he speaks of generativity like this. Generativity is primarily the concern for establishing and guiding the next generation. There are, of course, people who, from misfortune or because of special and genuine gifts in other directions, do not apply this drive to offspring of their own, but to other forms of altruistic concern and creativity, which which many absorb their kind of parental drive. So what he's saying in this instance is that, okay, people have this desire, this need to create. He calls it, kind of showing his Freudian roots here, he calls it a libidinal investment, or an investment of one's libido, the drive to create. And so he talks about the fact that, okay, this doesn't necessarily mean to have kids, although it can for many people. But it also means, what can I create in order to pass on to future generations? What can I do to kind of move society forward? He goes on to talk about stagnation. Where such enrichment fails altogether, regression to an obsessive need for pseudo-intimacy takes place, often with a pervading sense of stagnation, boredom, and interpersonal impoverishment. Individuals then often begin to indulge themselves as if they were on their own, or one another's, one and only child. And where conditions favor it, early invalidism, physical or psychological, becomes the vehicle of self-concern. On the other hand, the mere fact of having or even wanting children does not achieve generativity. I'm sorry for my poor reading on that one. That was it. He had a lot of commas in there and a lot of hyphenated words. So what is he saying with regards to stagnation? He's saying that individuals who don't have this drive to generate, sort of similar to what happened in early adulthood, or possibly because of the early adulthood exclusivity, may develop a sense of isolation and almost narcissistic self-absorption, in that they are only focused upon themselves. They don't focus on the future of man. They don't focus on passing on anything to future generations. They just basically are floating through life and just have no concern or care for the importance of the impact that they could have on others. So let's talk about this in greater depth here. So in terms of the central process, it is to fit and to be creative. So I've already said that in this stage, many adults are trying to kind of figure out who they are in terms of their career and kind of fit into that expert role in their career. They are now, kind of at a point where Erikson believes they could run things. Like, this is whenever you start seeing people step up in leadership roles, upper management, politics, possibly even, in their own business, expanding their business or something like that. Being creative. And just like Erikson mentioned when in his talk about generativity, it's not just creating something. It is a passing on. It is a making of something and passing it on to future generations. It could be standards and lessons that you've learned, product that you've developed, something that that you have become a master of, and you are, conveying it to future generations. The radius of significant relationships is the dividing and sharing aspect. Okay, now what does that mean? It's not a specific person or group or peer or anything like that, but it is a sense of, okay, I'm going to, I'm going to take what I have done and I'm going to share it. I'm going to divide up what I've made, and I'm going to convey it forth. Okay, and this can be to coworkers. This can be to children. to mentor or mentees or students, for instance. The adaptive ego quality in this stage is care. Why would that be the ego quality here? Well, it's a sense of, I've made something. I've done something. I have created, and I am caring enough about what I've created to want to see it continue. And so I'm going to pass it on. However, the core pathology of this is rejectivity, being unwilling to embrace others and bring them into what you have created. So it's like the entrepreneur businessman who's developed a great new way of writing software, or a great new management skill that has made him millions of dollars, and he doesn't want to share that with anybody because other people are a threat. If he lets it get out that this is how he's doing things and how he's making his millions, he could lose it all, or somebody else could take and make millions in place of him and do better than he does. So it's a rejection of others and a rejection of the willingness to convey what one has done. The principle of social order is education and tradition. So we've kind of talked in the past about how teenagers or later adolescents kind of learn the traditions and the standards and the norms of society from older adults. Well, this is when this is who they are learning it from. Okay, they're getting educated by people who they see as mentors and leaders and coaches and heroes and idols and figureheads, and they're having these messages pumped into them by the middle adulthood individuals because they're their parents or whatnot. The ritualism of this stage is generational versus authoritism. Now, what does this mean? It's referring to that concept of passing on, the concept of giving of oneself to a future generation. But if you go too far with it, you could overdo it. And to the point where you become very authoritarian in the way you present your views. This is the only way this is done. Don't you know anything? Why are you doing it like that? I don't understand, how you think you can do something like this after I've told you 100,000 times that, you have to do it this way. You beat them over the head. And what do we expect them, what do we expect the future generation to take from that? Possibly how to be authoritarian in their own way. Possibly a rejection of the possibly good value that you're trying to instill, but the way you presented it becomes, so negative that they just outright reject it. The theological lesson here from Gleason's book is the doctrine of creation. And again, it's not just the creation of another person, a child or an adolescent, but it can be a creation of a thing, something that you have made and have nurtured and have fostered into a mature, possibly idea, product, creation of your own. It is your brainchild, basically. And so Gleason suggests that we taste in this the joy that God had when he created everything. And we come to relate to God in a deeper level when we care for our creation that we have developed and have nurtured, just as he has developed and nurtured us. So let's talk about different ways and aspects of generativity. There are 4 ways to generate. You can generate biologically by giving birth, parentally by nurturing. Now, you don't necessarily, the first 2 don't necessarily have to go together. You can become the step parent of somebody and kind of nurture them in that way. Work by passing on skills or products to others, better working techniques or stuff like that. Or culturally, you could change the culture in some way, possibly by writing a book that brings to light some new aspect of thought, or by getting into politics, or becoming a lawmaker, or something like that, or just maybe, taking in, and becoming involved in a particular community and helping to change and renovate that community. There are 4 aspects of generativity. Generative concern. This is, our cognitive and emotional desire and passion for making changes and developing things, for creating. Generative commitment. And this is our personal investment in what we have created. Generative actions, these are the things that we actually do. These are the behaviors, the creation process itself. And then generative narrative, in which it's the meaning making of what we have created. I made this product and it did this for these people. My son or daughter has gone and done these things with the values that I have instilled in them. And we tell these stories about what we've done and what we've made. Now, Bernice Newgarden, always have difficulty with that name, developed a concept of changes in personality that occur throughout the lifespan, and she focused in particularly in middle adulthood. So middle age is seen as a specific part of the life cycle, obviously, but it's seen as a bridge between generations. Again, I mentioned the sandwich generation. Well, it's bridging the younger generation and the older generation. In the middle, you have the middle adults. Middle age is characterized by thinking in terms of time left versus time lived. Now, a lot of times, this is when people start thinking towards retirement, or they have been preparing for retirement for some time, God willing, and they are thinking about, okay, where have I come from? Where do I have left to go? How much time do I have left to go? Well, based upon that, let's kind of figure out how we're going to work retirement eventually, and how we're going to pay for retirement, and what we're going to do when we're retired, things like that. Middle age is experienced at a time of confidence in one's ability to perform and problem solve. So, this is when you're the boss. You are the authority figure, you are the manager, the creator, the authority for what you have done or what you do, and where you're going to take things. People look to you for problem solving, and subsequently you see yourself as an expert. Now, there are gender differences between males and females, obviously, with regards to how they view middle adulthood. Men typically have sort of negative appraisals of middle adulthood, whereas women typically have very positive, or more positive, I should say, appraisals of middle adulthood. Men see things as career-related events. They see things as, okay, well, how is this going to, move me forward? It's very agentic, very almost self-centered in a way. Seeing things as, how am I going to benefit from this, and how is it going to affect how I work and how I do things? Females typically see things as primarily through a familial lens. How is this going to affect my family? How is this going to impact our kids? Things like that. Men typically become very aware of their physical changes, whereas before, they were the physical powerhouse and the physically fit guy who could run a marathon in 2 hours and 30 minutes. Now they're starting to slow down. They may have aches. They may develop arthritis. Things that their body starts to catch up with them, and they see these things as constraints. They see age as an enemy, rather than a friend and a guide. Whereas women see things, they don't, research has found that women don't typically think that things like physical changes related to like menopause or things like that are particularly groundbreaking or earth-shattering as men see their physical changes. And they also see things in a much more positive way in terms of like freedom. They're now able to, be kind of financially stable if they're married and don't have kids, or they may be able to say, as I have aged, I've come into a greater wisdom of how to, do things better and quicker and more efficiently. And so I have a lot more time to enjoy life and do things. Whereas, like I said, men are very much constraint oriented. So again, there are many physical changes that occur in later life. For instance, loss of bone mass in women, and you start seeing a lot of women have to take supplements and exercise, certain ways and things like that in order to prevent things like osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, things of that nature. Obviously, weight gain, wrinkles, graying hair. You see things like menopause in females, and also some reproductive changes in men as well that oftentimes correspond with the point at which women begin their menopause. So men's reproductive sort of life and their testosterone levels actually kind of change along with their wives' hormonal changes as well. And then the way people deal with stress and how they react to stress also kind of plays a huge role in how we age. So if we are a type A type person who's like, has to be perfect and is, kind of anxious and neurotic about things, they're going to react to things in a much more stressful way, and that's more negative to things like their immune health, their gastrointestinal health, heart health, emotional health, mental health, than people who are type Bs who just kind of like water off a duck's back, hey, we'll make it through, it's fine. And so they deal with stress a little bit better than perhaps type As do. So this chart basically talks about physical changes that occur. So just thinking about myself, I'm right here. So I'm still kind of at almost the peak of my game. But I'm already kind of starting to see, okay, well, around 40 or so, I'm going to start declining. And then 60 happens and you're really declining, especially with things like your breathing capacity. And then that just keeps declining even more. And so you can kind of see the physical changes occurring over time. Now, I know this is kind of difficult to read, but the red is muscle, the orangish yellow is fat, the bone is the sort of white, and then the blue is other, so like your organs and things like that. So you can kind of see here that at age 25 versus age 75, in that 50-year time span, the amount of fat you have doubles to 40%. The amount of muscle goes in half. So the other two don't really change a whole lot, but you can kind of see the difference here between the fat to muscle ratio. Okay, so be very aware of that as you age. You need to keep taking good care of yourself. Some changes will be noticed, but if you take good care of yourself, exercise, eat right, things like that, hopefully you can stave off a lot of this. I feel like a public service announcement. Now, obviously, the Bible also talks a lot about aging, particularly in the book of Second Samuel and First Samuel as well. So if you're at all interested, feel free to just kind of flip through your Bibles and take a look at what these verses say about things like, you know, the loss of hearing and sight, the gray hair, loss of strength, but also the psychological frustrations that come with these losses. So let's talk a little bit about work. In particular, we're going to start with Super's life career rainbow. Okay, so he has 6 roles: homemaker, worker, citizen, leisureite, student, and child. That a person, these roles are roles that someone will assume across the lifespan to some extent. And each role has sort of a growth, an exploration, an establishment, a maintenance, and a disengagement aspect to it. So at any given point, I am all of these to some different extent. So right now, I'm probably into worker, worker and citizen more than I am leisureite, student, child, and homemaker. I was student very soon, not too long ago, so I'm kind of in the disengagement stage in my role as a student. But I'm always going to be learning, right? So there's still going to be a little bit of maintenance playing out in my student role. And there's still going to be, sort of the growth that comes from that. But now I'm really kind of growing and establishing myself in my career and as a citizen. Whereas, and to some extent, the homemaker as well. And whereas whenever I was a child, I was like, I was established in my play and my exploration, but I still have aspects of the child that's going on in me right now. So it's still kind of maintaining, maybe disengaging a little bit from that sort of lifestyle as I kind of assume these other roles. So, I mean, hear me when I say, this can kind of get a little complex because in each of these stages, you have all of these aspects playing out to some extent. So let's take a look at this rainbow. All right. Now, I remember whenever I first took a look at this, I was like, whoa, I don't get this. All right. So let me kind of break this down. So you have the growth, exploration, establishment, maintenance, and disengagement. Okay, and those are the overarching organizational stages of a person's life. Here you have child, student, leisureite, citizen, worker, and homemaker. And the line, the kind of the shaded area beneath each one kind of corresponds to the word above it. So this line is child, this line is student, leisureite, citizen, worker, and homemaker. Okay? So and you can see the ages here. So from 5 to 80. All right. So as somebody grows older, so you can see that there's a lot of gray over here between the ages of 5 and 10. Also, you have kind of a high level of student. You're learning a lot at this age. But then around 25 to 30, student really just kind of drops off, boom, like that. But it kind of peaks every now and then, as we learn new things. There's child, the play aspect of child kind of remains throughout life, all right? The leisureite, we always have leisure activities, but as we retire and get older, these leisureite activities kind of increase. The same thing with like homemaker activities. The worker kind of titrates as we get around age 60 into retirement age. So that kind of makes sense there. I don't know why there's this gap here for around age 45 for worker. And also, as we age, we kind of become more of more engaged in our communities and things like that. But as we get older, that kind of titrates as well to the point where we're not able to do things quite as well as we used to, right? So I hope that kind of helped you understand the rainbow a little bit, the life career rainbow, because I know for a while I was rather confused with this one. So again, like I said, there are these 5 stages and keep in mind, while it has age aspect to each one of these, and while the rainbow itself kind of shows these growth, exploration, establishment, maintenance, and disengagement aspects to, as kind of corresponding to an age range, each stage kind of has that disengagement and growth and exploration, establishment aspect to itself. Okay. So you kind of cycle through these as you go through each role. But for the most part, the growth typically occurs up until about age 11. Then you explore your world. Then you establish yourself in mid-20s and maintain your life, and then disengage in late adulthood. So it's kind of showing the predominant stage of each sort of age group. This is just kind of giving a developmental task chart here with regards to each age group and each stage. And like I said, you can see how growth can be manifested in each stage, and so can the other life stages as well. So, yeah. This is just another look at how to think about supers theory. It can be seen as sort of a stepwise model. So, just a different way of kind of thinking about it. So, in terms of how we look at family, whereas a lot of times men are seen as sort of the primary breadwinner and they go out and work, women are also working. However, they still take on a lot of the household chores and caring for the family more so than the man. Why that is, gender stereotypes perhaps, societal norms, family norms, who knows? Typically it is the woman, though, that does a large aspect of the family raising. Now, that's just what's been found. I'm not endorsing that in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just conveying the information on that. And again, women are more likely to interrupt their career for family aspects than men. So let's talk about relationships with children in middle age. So typically, as a child ages, they become more able to relate to their adult parents, and the adult parents are more able to relate to their children. So the relationship typically improves with the child. Now, if you remember from last week, we talked about how marital satisfaction typically bottoms out as in terms of very satisfied ratings for this age. So as you kind of see a difference there. So as marital satisfaction decreases, satisfaction with one's relationship with their child increases. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. Most parents do, in fact, look forward to an empty nest. They want to kind of get back to that, having a life of their own, and problems typically arise when the child moves back in, comes home from college, and is like, I don't have a job. Could you help me financially? And all of a sudden, this empty nest that they've kind of established is tossed on its head. Now, mothers, interestingly enough, typically adopt the role of kin keeping, and that's maintaining the family connections. Really, they're the kind of the glue that holds the family together, more so than the father. Now, in terms of relationships with aging parents, as I said before, these middle adults are like the sandwich generation, and so all of a sudden they are tasked with more caring for their older parents. And it typically falls upon the daughter or the daughter-in-law to do this. So what I'm trying to say here is that women typically have it kind of hard when it comes to um, if they have a career of their own. All of a sudden, they've got their kids, to take care of, and they've got their older parents to take care of. And this can be very stressful, especially if the parent moves in. So what happens then if the kid comes back from college and all of a sudden, grandma falls and breaks her hip, and she can't care for herself anymore and has to move in with the family as well. Oh my gosh, and all of a sudden, all of this is on mom, and she's having to deal with this, plus work, plus the kid. And so, I mean, I'm just trying to illustrate how this can be extremely stressful and extremely problematic for middle-aged women. Men, on the other hand, typically kind of distance themselves a little bit, kind of, again, are very career focused and think about how is this going to affect my career? Well, that doesn't really help. And so a lot of times what you'll see with middle-aged couples coming in for therapy is you'll see this sort of conflict in views of how they want to proceed with their family issues. Okay. So he wants things to just kind of maintain the status quo, whereas she's seeing, I don't think this can maintain, and I'm the one who's getting dumped on here, and you're just going to work and coming home and going to bed, and I'm sitting here blowing in the breeze. So it's a common issue a lot of times. So in terms of parenting, I know we've talked about this before, but single parents have a lot more difficulties than married parents. So if you have two biological parents, it's going to be a little bit easier financially and support-wise, even though, like it says here, fathers typically are a little bit less involved in direct care. At least you're going to have sort of that stability and support. Whereas if you are single parent, you're going to be worse off financially, and there's going to be that emotional stress and frustration there. So, and really, a lot of times they see themselves as a failure. They see a failed marriage, and all of a sudden, I'm getting punished for the rest of my life because my marriage failed, and now I don't have any financial support, and I'm a single parent, and mom has fallen and broken her hip and has to move in, and I'm just it's just driving me insane. Now, in terms of step parenting, foster parenting, and adoptive parenting, we've already talked about kind of the problems with blended families and sort of the challenges that older children may have with a new parental figure in their life. They're like, you know what? You're not my real father. You're not my real mom. Why are you even here? Just because mom likes you doesn't mean I do. Things like that. So it can be stressful in that regard too. So how one parents will change as a child grows older. When the child is younger, obviously the parent is going to be involved in all sorts of everything that the child does, constant supervision, constant care for the child. As they kind of age, though, they're able to kind of assume more roles. They're kind of able to clean the house better. They're able to be trusted with making their own food, able to dress themselves, and not, the parent doesn't have to worry about them like running through the house with scissors and stabbing themselves. It's the trust in the child's abilities to be a young adult as they grow into, through school age and adolescence is much better. And so as a child grows into that, the parent is able to become sort of a sideline cheerleader, sort of maybe a support structure. If the child needs some advice, they can be there and help them. If they need resources, the parent can be there for them. As they move into young adulthood and kind of start their own families, the parents can become sort of a consultant and a friend role, maybe a role model. A lot of times, though, parents, especially if their child moves back into the parent's home, will kind of have difficulty moving from these aspects to the young adult aspect, because the child who has perhaps moved back in is kind of moving back into that adolescent role, that, you know, they're still living under their parents' roof, they're still eating their parents' food and using their laundry, machines, and still financially sort of dependent upon the parent while they kind of try to figure themselves out. And so a lot of times parents will have difficulty with this, and kids will have difficulty with this because the parents don't set good boundaries as to how those new relationships should look. Now, in terms of men and women, around 40 to 50, you start seeing sort of almost a gender role switch. Women tend to assume much more what we would consider masculine qualities of strength and assertiveness and independence, whereas men become much more emotionally available, really. Whereas before, men were, men see emotion as a threat to themselves, and they don't like to be vulnerable. And all of a sudden, well, maybe not all of a sudden, it may take a very long time, but they start to kind of become a little bit more soft. Maybe once they have grandkids or something like that. Or they may be much more apt to talk about their bad day at work rather than just kind of sucking it up and powering through. They may actually share their struggles. So you can kind of see that there's an assumption of these sorts of different roles here. Now, why this is? Perhaps hormonal changes as women go into menopause and men kind of go through their own hormonal changes. Perhaps they have kind of assumed different qualities of their spouse. Perhaps the woman has impressed upon the man the need for emotional vulnerability, whereas the man has kind of said, you need to be more independent and assertive and, take on these sorts of agentic roles. I don't know. Just some thoughts to think about. So how does this apply in terms of spiritually? If we have somebody coming to us and saying, I'm going through sort of my middle age, and I really don't know how I think about God and what that means. What does it mean to be an old man, or an older man, I should say, or an older woman, and be in a relationship with God? Or how do I how do the changes that are occurring in my family, what does God say about those? And so maybe they're moving into stage 5 of Fowler's stages. Perhaps they've kind of come to this point where they can sort of manage and understand these spiritual mysteries and ambiguities. Perhaps they are coming to a greater wisdom about what it means to be a Christian and having faith. Clinically, what happens if perhaps they are a single parent, or they do have their kid move back in with them, and their parent breaking a hip and having to move in with them. So all of a sudden they've got this stress and they don't know how to juggle this. Maybe all of a sudden their parent begins showing signs of Alzheimer's disease, and so they are now the caregiver of this parent. Perhaps they've been divorced and remarried, and how do they kind of work these family issues out? Things like that. And also, in terms of culture, we've already talked about men and women differences, but what about different cultures and how they view younger generations and older generations? How does that middle age, as the bridge between these generations, how are they viewing these older and younger generations? So how do they view, for instance, women in the workplace? How do they view family values and what it means to be the head of a household or the caregiver? Questions to think about. Okay, guys, so that basically does it for week 11. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, call me, and I will be glad to help in any way I can. Until we meet again for week 12, though, I hope you have a great week and good studies.